Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. For those of you who are just joining us tonight for the first time, you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV. I also like to tell you before I tell you all the sites that you can find my work at that I've got a guest tonight who's got limited time. His name is Travis Brents. He is a rapper and an artist in Pennsylvania who's got some very, very good artwork, very good songs as well. I'm going to tell you where you can find all of that. We're going to talk to him a little bit. And also I'm going to get into the Syria and Ferguson situation after he leaves us tonight. But if you're interested in my work, you can catch my work at activistpost.com and theantimedia.org. I write for both of those websites on a regular basis. And if you're interested in my work specifically, then please go to BrandonTurbeville.com. And you got to type in the W's, the www.BrandonTurbeville.com. And that is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the interviews that I do, and all the archive versions of this show. And you can also find the links to my books as well on the homepage on the Books tab. Find all the contact info as well there on that page. So, before we get into too much detail, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the guest that I've got on for the next 20 minutes or so. His name is Travis Brents, and you can find his artwork, or at least some of his artwork, at travisprints.blogspot.com. You can look at the artwork there, and you can also contact him if you want to purchase some of it. It's really good. Also, he's got some of his songs up on YouTube, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But other than that, Travis, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Brandon, for having me on here.
Yeah, no problem. It's I want to, I guess, start talking about the music first. And you got a couple songs up on YouTube that I think people would be interested in. And this is not, when I say you're a rapper, you're not a generic rapper, right? This is music that's actually got a message. And it talks about anything from 9/11 truth to martial law to gun rights, all of this kind of stuff. And just take a minute to tell everybody a little bit about what kind of music you do.
Well, when I first started writing music with a couple other guys, and it was basically generic music initially to start with, but right around 9/11, 2001, 2002, I started reading different books and paying a lot more attention to the news and the media hype surrounding different issues and situations that are still currently taking place now. And after I accumulated so much information on, how our government, our system, our society is really structured, I couldn't help but put that into my music, and I tried really hard to convey a message. Not just, a lot of people are lyrical, but I'm not just having lyrics, but actually saying something to enlighten someone. Maybe I could get a little bit of information in there that would spark somebody to say, hey, I need to research this myself. That's what he said was almost too unbelievable. I have to check this out, and I wanted people to do things like that. So I actually tried and put a lot of effort into writing some songs that I did for a while, but it didn't really pan out. It seems like our society is kind of stuck in a rut, and people didn't want to hear stuff like that, and some people still don't want to hear music like that, which is a shame. So for a while I stopped writing music, and like you say, I started a YouTube channel fairly recently, and it was because there were a few people who heard my songs and they said, yo, people need to hear this. You should try to get it out there. So that's what I've been doing for the past month or so.
Yeah, and I guess, to some extent, a lot of these songs were before their time, because the songs that are up on YouTube are actually pretty old in terms of, recent years. It's not something that you wrote 6 months ago. This is something that you wrote 3 years ago at least, right?
Yeah, I have one song that's 4 years old, and I have one song that's actually 6 years old. It was, if I'm not mistaken, I wrote a song during President Bush last year in office, and it was my first attempt at trying to write a song that actually had substance, that actually had a meaning to it, that I felt like I needed to let people hear, what I was thinking about, and that was 6 years ago. So yeah, and if you listen to him now, I mean, because the situation hasn't really changed much, this post 9/11 society that we live in, and we've been stuck this way, and it's only getting worse. So, like you say, I had to get my music out there because even though it's 4, 6 years old, it's still relevant today, and the message is still relevant, even more so today.
Yeah, I agree, and it's still cutting edge. You describe toward the end of one of your songs, you were very critical of the Bush administration, and then you became critical of the Obama administration in the same song, and you stated that this isn't a change, it's just a rerun. And you were referring to the fact that this was a seamless transition, no difference between Bush and Obama.
Exactly, and like I say, putting thought into that to let people understand it is because me being an African American, and Bush bashing, it could be considered as racism, but I show no favoritism at all. A president is a president, and for the longest, our country places a puppet president in office to keep things the same. These guys aren't elected to make real change. They give us hope, but they basically are the same entity, So yeah, from Bush to Obama, it was a rerun. You're getting the same thing dealt to you over again.
Yeah, and in fact, Carroll Quigley said when he wrote his book Tragedy and Hope back in the early 1960s that we haven't elected a president for 60 years, which would have been 1900 roundabout. And the fact that Americans haven't actually elected a real president since 1900 at least, that ought to ring true for a lot of people. And this guy was a historian for the Council on Foreign Relations, and all that dovetails with exactly what you're saying. But before we start talking about the art, I want just why don't you tell everybody what was some of the information that really helped wake you up to what was going on in the world?
I was living in Philadelphia in 2000, and through a group of friends, a book got circulated from one person to another, and it eventually got to me. A friend of mine said, "Hey, Travis, you should really read this book," and it was David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret. And before that, I've always felt something wasn't quite right, even as a youngster. So once I read some of David Icke's material, it kind of solidified things for me because he was so informative and almost made predictions in that book. And so after the 9/11 event, like I said, that it drove me more to do more research, to become more aware. And me and a friend of mine actually just dove into a mindset of researching and finding out everything that we possibly can, and seeing how can we get this information out to our community, to the point where we were on Alex Jones' website and ordering all his DVDs and watching these things and going to the Tea Party rallies and speaking with people and getting other information that we couldn't find ourselves, and starting to read more articles written by people like Quigley or Tarpley or so many people are listening to Alan Watt and just getting all this good information. And then once you started writing your books, it was even more information for me, and it all of that combined is what I took, and I tried to put it to a tune and put it in musical form, because everyone doesn't enjoy just reading a nonfiction book, straight facts, and I can understand that. So if you don't like reading a book, here, I'll rap it to you, and you should be able to catch it that way. If you can't get it this way, you'll get it that way. If you don't like that, then we used to burn up DVDs. Here, you don't want to read it, you don't want to listen to it in music. Here, sit down and watch it on the DVD. Here's some good information for you. So we was just trying any kind of outlet possible to get this information circulating.
Yeah, and it takes a variety of different methods to get it out there because, as you say, a lot of people don't read the books, and they don't read the articles, and you realize that so many people just simply will not look at information if it's not presented in a video format with tons of graphics and flashing lights and catchy music. And so sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to just produce the information in whatever format they'll take it. And you're doing some of that, with the art that you do. As well, but I really wish that we could, have some pictures of the art up for the listeners, but, unfortunately, this is a radio show, we can't do that, so they'll have to go to travisprince.blogspot.com, and all the artwork is there, and they can take a look at it for the recent artwork and some of the artwork that goes back several years. It should be easy to see on the website there, but, just if you can, if it's possible to describe one's art, could you even begin to describe it? What type of art that you do?
I would have to call it eclectic because I really don't have a specific subject matter or a genre of style that I would categorize myself as. So it's more of just eclectic art. I like painting any and everything from still lifes to landscapes to animals. Excuse me. I really love and enjoy painting portraits because I love people. Everybody's beautiful to me in one way or another. And so I really can't categorize myself. I just like doing anything, but I really have been trying lately to put simple messages into my art.
Yeah, and of course you get points for the fact that you had an art piece where my name, yours truly, was included, and so that gives you points right there.
Yeah, that piece actually sold for a good amount. The guy he really liked it, and yeah, your name, and I put a few other small things in there, and it just took that person to see it, and he understood what I was trying to connect and the message I was trying to convey, and he absolutely loved the piece.
Yeah, well, I'll expect my commission in the mail soon. Yeah. So you have an upcoming art show, right? In the next month or so.
Yes, actually, September the 5th will be the date of, as of right now, the largest show that I've ever done. I'm looking to have 39 or 40 paintings in the show, and it's a really decent gallery. It's AFA Gallery, Artists for the Arts, which is located in Scranton, Pennsylvania on Lackawanna Avenue. And it's just a really good thing, and like I say, I have an eclectic art style, which would mean that some of my pieces are somewhat controversial, and they're a really good gallery, and they are allowing me to display everything I want. So, and like I say, some trying to become a professional artist is kind of hard, but I try my hardest, and I hope that my dreams will come true. And if you guys check out my art and you're in the know, look close at all my pieces. There you will find something in there that will tickle you just because you see it and you understand it, and a lot of other people won't.
Yeah, and if they're interested in purchasing the art, there's contact info right there on the website, right?
Oh yes, correct. And I still actually have in my possession a lot of original pieces. If you feel like you want an original piece, that's awesome. If you just want a print or anything, I can get you a poster print, a canvas print for a much cheaper deal. And everything will be signed for you and signed and numbered. And if you want to look at some more of more recent art that I have a separate Facebook page that is strictly art. If you search Paintings by the Prince on Facebook, you guys should find me up there as well.
Yeah, Paintings by the Prince on Facebook. I should have mentioned that. I forgot to mention that. And you said the art show is going to be September the 5th at the Artist for Art Gallery. I think this is 514 Lackawanna Avenue. That's Lackawannna, and that's Scranton, Pennsylvania. So what time in the evening?
Yes, the reception will be from 6 p.m. till 9 p.m.
Yep, and they'll be able to take a look at the art. They'll be able to chat with you and hopefully purchase some art, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, Travis, thanks for coming on the show tonight, and we'll have to have you back up. And best of luck with the art show. And is there anything else you want to leave us with before you dip out here? Or
I appreciate you having me on as a guest. I always enjoy talking to you, Brandon. I always enjoy reading your materials, and the articles that you write for Intel Hub gets me through the week, because I can't watch the Fox News and the CNN and all those guys. So I always turn to you for my information, buddy. You never let me down.
Yeah, we got to avoid the crap news network and crock news. So thanks again for coming on the show, Travis.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there he goes, Travis Prince of travisprince.blogspot.com and Paintings by the Prince on Facebook. Follow his work there, and also check him out on YouTube if you can. Now, we've got to talk about a number of other issues in the time that we have this evening, and hopefully we'll get to comments on the Ferguson situation. Speaking of Ferguson, let's go to New York right now, and I just want to bring this up. I've got an article out entitled "New York State Candidate for Governor Arrested for Filming Police." That's what we have here. You know, despite the Supreme Court having ruled that videotaping police is entirely legal and protected by the First Amendment, we've got people all across the country who are being arrested for doing so. Generally speaking, the people who are videotaping the police tend to be activists or people who are just genuinely concerned, average citizen. But the police situation has grown so bold in their oppression and militarization and aggression that it doesn't really matter who it is. I mean, not that anybody should ever have their case decided by their race or by their standing in the community, but as a fact of life, if one was a little more important, I guess you should say, had a little more cash in society, the police wouldn't harass them as much, and that's not fair at all. But that's the way it was. It's gotten to the point now where police don't even care about that. They see all the American people as the enemy. So we have this situation here in New York City where Randy Credico, who is a Democratic candidate for the New York State governor's race, he's running in the Democratic primary. He's challenging that corrupt New York Governor Cuomo. And Credico was in the subway tunnel waiting on his train, and he witnessed two men aggressively stopping the tunnel. So Credico pulls out his phone and starts videotaping. Well, he wasn't quite aware of who they were to begin with. He should have been, because this is the MO of the police in New York. He whipped out his cell phone and started videotaping the altercation. And it turns out that the men were indeed the NYPD of the transit division. In fact, this all took place at the Dyckman Street subway tunnel, right? So we got all that. So he pulled out his phone to videotape the situation and got arrested for it. And again, as I said, the men were plainclothes transit police. They arrested Credico and took him to jail for videotaping the altercation. Now, this is despite federal rulings in Baltimore, Boston, Indianapolis, and a number of other places that said filming officers in public is protected by the Constitution. Apparently, the absence of a federal court ruling specifically mentioning New York City was enough to, it's enough to give the NYPD their belief that they can just arrest anybody in Stalin-style impunity here. But They for some time they refused to give Predico an appearance ticket. He's out now. They claimed that he had an outstanding warrant for disorderly conduct from 2012, which is not believable. The guy's been in many different press releases and press conferences, and he's been in court a number of times due to his campaign and his activism, so it's not likely that he'd have that just laying around and not having been dealt with in terms of his warrant. So that's just one more instance of police brutality. And again, we're going to get to Ferguson soon enough, but I want to finish up with some of the more international issues first. And one of these is, I think I may have discussed this last week on the show, but U.S. knew about 9/11 warning, staged Egypt revolution, ex-Interior Minister. Basically, ex-Interior Minister Habib al-Adli of Egypt was, after the deposing or deposition of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, he was brought up on charges, and this is under the Morsi government. Well, after Morsi was deposed by Sisi and his crew, Sisi is retrying al-Adli, and this is supposedly to give al-Adli a fair trial because he certainly wasn't going to get one under Morsi. And in this trial, Habib al-Adli, he gave a testimony to the court on national TV, and he made two claims. And to bear this in mind, the reports in the Western media, the few of them that existed, surrounded the Arab Spring comments, but they said nothing about 9/11. We have a translation here because it was all in Arabic and it wasn't translated. It's right there on YouTube, and the videos are linked in my post, but it was right there on YouTube and nobody had translated it. Nobody in the Western media seemed interested in this. Big news. But I had someone, I had a couple of people actually translate this for me. So what we've got here is a rough translation, and this is what he says. He says, in May 2001, we received information that a very huge terrorist attack will happen in the USA. How? The source of the information was inside the lair of Al-Qaeda, and we verified it, that there were preparations for the attack. I talked to President Mubarak and told him that I have information that a huge terrorist attack will happen in the USA. And I asked him if we should tell the Americans. He said, okay. We contacted the CIA and FBI and told them about the information. They said, thanks. On August of the same year, we received the information that the operation entered its course of implementation, is entering its final steps. An operation like this takes time, preparations and arrangements, etc. This conversation was recorded between us and the source. I called the president and told him the information is confirmed. Should we tell them? He said, tell them. We called the people in the USA and told them that the operation entered its course of implementation. They said okay and thanks. Then the attack on the World Trade Center happened. This was the operation. Do you see how cooperative we were? This is why I'm furious and enraged. I cooperated with them, and in return they hit my organization and destroyed and ruined the country of Egypt. So that's al-Adli's quote. In other words, he's saying that they had prior knowledge of terrorist attacks on the United States. They had sources inside of Al-Qaeda that told them this, and they spread it. They spread the information to the United States. They warned the Americans, and the Americans did nothing. All right, so we have another quote by al-Adli, and he says, President Mubarak traveled to America in 2002. When there, he told President Bush, we told you about this attack and you didn't pay attention. Bush said, what attack? And how? Bush denied that they had heard about that, and Mubarak insisted that they did. Mubarak called me to confirm that we informed them about the information. He asked me, who did I tell? I said the CIA people. He said okay and told Bush. It seems the CIA people told Bush that they didn't receive any news, and Mubarak told him, no, we informed you this and that. Then they said, oh yes, it happened, but it was only told verbally. What verbally? It seems as if they wanted to receive some written memo. We received the news, blah, 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 what happened. That's al-Adli's quote. So, if everything that El Adley said is true regarding this situation of 9/11, and I believe that it is because this corroborates information that we've had for some time, this is reminiscent of the Condoleezza Rice situation with the 9/11 memo, remember, where she said it was very vague and it was only a page or so, a couple lines, and it turned out that it wasn't vague at all, it was pretty specific, and it was 10 pages. We also know that some time ago we have reports, for instance, we've known that Mubarak and the Egyptians warned the United States about incoming terrorist attacks as far back as December 7th, 2001, when the AP reported about that Mubarak, I think one of the titles that says, Egypt leader says he warned America, and it was reported in Beirut, Lebanon, December 7th, 2001. I linked to that in my article if you want to see it. But it says, here, let me just read this part to you. It says, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak says he warned the United States that something would happen 12 days before the September 11th terror attacks on New York and Washington. We expected that something was going to happen and informed the Americans. We told them, Mubarak said. He did not mention a U.S. response. But nobody expected the event would be of such enormity. We did not know that they would hit this target or that, and we were all surprised when planes with passengers on board hit the Twin Towers, Mubarak said. So that's from 2001. Now, he also states, we got to get to this Arab Spring situation, because this ties into what we're going to discuss tonight, too. He says during the testimony that the United States was responsible for the 2011 uprising in Egypt, the Arab Spring, the April 6th youth movement. Let's get into this here. He says that the U.S. had a twofold plan, basically. First part of the plan was to offer financial incentives to adopt the leadership model provided by the U.S. In other words, the U.S. was going to offer them a model of government and tell them, this is how we want you to run your country, basically. And if the leaders refused, the U.S. would accuse them of being dictators. And then the second part was to mobilize the golden youth of these countries and use them to destabilize and overthrow the government. El Adley stated that the U.S. planned and carried out what is essentially a color revolution in Egypt in 2011. He says the U.S. trained activists within the Kafaya and April 6th youth movement, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood out of Qatar, and used them to act as destabilization agents against Egypt and other Middle Eastern countries. El Adley stated that foreign elements were brought into the movements, and this has been borne out to be true. That these foreign elements initiated violence in Egypt, particularly in Suez, and then as it spread to Cairo. He describes the security forces as showing restraint throughout the entire ordeal, and that's true enough. He said that there were moles within the Egyptian police, and he says these moles gave their weapons to Palestinian police, who then fired on Egyptian activists for the purpose of framing Egyptian police. In other words, they gave weapons to someone from Palestine who fired on the activists and framed the Egyptian police and instigated more violence. And of course, when you talk about that, you would look at Hamas, you would look at Hamas, which is supporting these terrorists in the Sinai. So you got to wonder who these people are. Who are these Palestinian police? And of course, we're no fan of Israel here. We're no fan of Israel on this show. We're also no fan of Hamas either. So, I would suggest the political forces of Palestine should be rallied around the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Fatah, as it had been for some time before Israel funded and created Hamas to divide that opposition. So we've got reports from Aram Online, which did cover the issue surrounding the Arab Spring, which you can read. It's linked in my article. El Adley, just a couple of other things that we want to touch on here. He said that obviously the U.S. trained groups in Kafaya and April 6th Youth Movement. That was a U.S. created organization. We also have the videos here in the article as well. So, sorry if that sounded confusing. Basically, just go read my article. U.S. knew about 9/11 warning, staged Egypt revolution, ex-interior minister. and that's up at Activist Post and my website, BrandonTurbeville.com. So that's up there. Everything's linked. All the sources have been cited, and of course the videos are up there too. If you speak Arabic, I know that I have Arabic listeners, so you could feel free to watch the video. And if you think I got the translation wrong here or there, you can go to the comment section on Activist Post and give your own version. But I think the translation that we have is going to be fairly accurate. So, got a few more minutes in this segment, so let me get to another article. Syrian Kurds, not U.S. military, rescued trapped Yazidis in Iraq. And this is sort of a minor point, I suppose, but let's remember what we've been hearing. The propaganda assault against the American people for so long, promoting the fact that we have these trapped Yazidi minorities in Iraq. They're trapped upon Mount Sinjar. They don't have food, they don't have water, and they've got the death squad apes at the bottom of the mountain screaming and telling them they're going to convert to their religion, to Islam, or they'll have their heads cut off. Now, of course, the American media has not cared one bit for Christians or Yazidis or Alawites or anybody across Syria or Iraq for the last 3-4 years. But suddenly now it's an emergency. Suddenly we got to protect these minorities in Iraq, and Obama looks for targeted airstrikes. We justify targeted airstrikes to prevent genocide. We engage in targeted airstrikes. The Western media repeats reports the information. Reporting is the same thing in the mainstream. They report the information as targeted airstrikes near the area of Mount Sinjar. Of course, as we talked about on this show, and as I've written in the articles, those initial airstrikes weren't near Mount Sinjar. They were in Erbil. And what is in Erbil? That's the capital of Kurdistan, or what is essentially Kurdistan, the Iraqi Kurdish area, which is going to be Kurdistan because they're trying to destabilize 3 different countries there to create a micro-state and mini-state. But what else is in Erbil? It's a hub for oil companies. It's a hub for British and American oil companies, and the death squads were trying to seize those oil fields. Well, death squads are funded by the West, by NATO. They're controlled by the West and NATO. But these people don't have microchips in their brain, right? There's not a joystick running them. So once you deploy them in mass, once you deploy 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 of these animals, they're going to get off the reservation. They're going to slip through the fence. And when they slip through the fence and start going after your own interests and not the target, not just the target that you've directed them at, then you bomb them. You kill them because they're expendable. So, and it also keeps up the farce. So what you do, this is what we have here in the mainstream. We have reports as if Mount Sinjar was in the area of Erbil. That's not true. Erbil is in the northeast or central northeast of the country. Mount Sinjar was on the northwest of the country. So the only U.S. military activity that took place on Mount Sinjar is they sent Special Forces troopers to parachute down on top of the mountain to observe and see what the situation was for the Yazidis. And when they got there, of course, they found that there weren't as many on the mountain as they thought there were. And in fact, what happened was that a lot of these people had already been rescued. Right? They had been rescued. We have about 50,000 Yazidis had fled to Mount Sinjar, and by the time the American forces got there to observe, 45,000 of them had been rescued, not by the Marines. You look at the Western media, and it would say the U.S. Marines saved them. Oh God, the U.S. Marine Corps. All right, so proud, so brave. No, it was the Syrian Kurdish forces that saved these people. These were Kurds in the Syrian Kurdish region who, when they found out that these people were stranded on the mountain, they actually armed themselves and they fought a bloody battle all the way to Mount Sinjar. And they brought these people down from the mountain and into safety, or relative safety, into Syria. So you can forget the U.S. Marine Corps being the saviors of the Yazidis. The Yazidis were never the issue. They were never of any interest to the Americans. No, instead, it was merely a propaganda ploy to get targeted airstrikes to protect the oil fields and the dam. So, of course, we also know that it's also an excuse to launch an invasion of Syria, and we'll talk about that in a minute. This idea of targeted airstrikes going to be expanded to Syria, and I've written about that on a number of different occasions, and it seems unbelievable to a lot of people, but God, this is exactly what's happening. And I guess we should touch on the Foley issue as well. We got a couple of minutes left in this segment. So check this article out. NATO using Foley and ISIS as a pretext for bombing Syria. Ultimate target is Russia. So we're going to get into this as much as we can in this segment, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Israel in the next segment, and then we're going to talk about Ferguson. So that's the outline of the show so far. Now, we've all seen the propaganda of the James Foley execution, right? This was the beheading of this American journalist. He had been to Libya, been captured in Libya, went to Syria, got captured in Syria, and he was beheaded. And you can watch, actually I linked to the video. I watched the video personally, and I've linked to it in my article, but it's since been removed. And I think there's good reason for this being removed, because I think personally that it was nothing but propaganda. I'm not even convinced that Mr. Foley is dead. But we have this video where Foley is brought out. He's in an orange jumpsuit. He's got his hands handcuffed behind his back, and he's standing there with a death squad fighter who's dressed in all black, and he says, he makes Foley give a speech. Foley gives a speech about how, basically the war is the reason he's going to die. Obama launched targeted airstrikes, and this is what makes him get beheaded. And he gives a plea to his brother in the military to stop fighting the Islamic State because they'll get other people killed and all that kind of stuff. He says his brother was the reason he got killed. All this, of course, is propaganda. The guy's forced to do this, allegedly. But the dead squad fighter is speaking in English. He's got a British accent. That's what everybody traces it as, a British accent. I think it could be British or possibly, I think British is the language there, the accent. But he gives this speech as well and says, this Obama, if you bomb anymore, it'll be the next, we have this next journalist that we're going to kill, all that kind of stuff. It's a propaganda method. And of course, this took place in Syria. So we got to look at a number of different things in regards to this video, and one of them, of course, is questions surrounding the authenticity of the video. Please go read my article, NATO using Foley and ISIS as a pretext for bombing Syria. Ultimate target is Russia. And this is up at Activist Post and BrandonTurbeville.com. Now, basically, the first thing that we have to look at in this whole situation is the video authentic? And I don't personally believe that it is, and I'll tell you why. I have viewed a lot of beheadings in this Syrian destabilization. The Syrian, I don't really want to call it a civil war. I call it an invasion, more or less. And I've seen a lot of this stuff, right? And this doesn't match up with some of the things I've seen. All right, now, here I will attribute this criticism to a number of other commentators because, I'm on the fence about this one. But the idea is Foley seems remarkably calm and collected in this video. And this is particularly interesting given the fact that he knows he's about to be beheaded. He's about to be killed, and he's about to be killed in a very brutal fashion. Now, some people may argue that he's calm just because he knows that he's going to die. There's nothing he can really do about it, and he's made peace with it. And that happens sometimes when someone's going to be executed. There's this calm that overcomes them. But other people have pointed out that this could be evidence to the contrary. In other words, that Foley knows he's not going to die. And this is a propaganda video. So there's that. But here's what I would like to point out. Here is, in this video, there is a distinct lack of blood in an execution that involves slicing a human throat. right? We had a report by Syrian Free Press that slowed down the video to see how many times that knife cut back and forth, and the guy says he saw it cut back and forth 10 times. Now, I've watched it several times myself, and I didn't slow it down because I don't have the ability to really slow it down, but I watched it in real time, and I got about 7 to 10 slices back and forth, and not one drop of blood. Now, you put your finger up to your throat, and you move your finger back 7 to 10 times back and forth, and you tell me that someone who has a knife and is using force with the purpose of cutting your throat, cut through your throat 7 to 10 times and there's no blood, that just doesn't seem credible to me. And here's the other interesting issue, is that the beheading, the actual beheading process, right, is censored. And all the videotaped beheadings that I have seen since the Syrian war, since 2011, I don't recall any that have been censored. Now, if the goal of a beheading video is to create fear, is to create outrage, then censoring the actual beheading is counterproductive. Now, they didn't censor Nick Berg, and that was clearly real. That was awful. And you can look at any of these other beheadings that are taking place in Syria. It's horrendous, right? And they don't censor it. In fact, it's not just one guy, not one death squad fighter standing around the other guys, standing around the victim, right? It's usually a big group. Where were the chants of Allahu Akbar, right? Where were the rest of the apes? Because this is what you usually get. But regardless, you don't get beheadings that are done in this manner that are censored. I don't recall one in which the video was censored. They don't do that. So I call them to question the video to begin with. So another response is going to be, well, where is Foley? I don't know where Foley is. I didn't know where Foley was for the last couple of years. I'll tell you what, though. The media told you he was being held by the Syrian government. As long as he was being held, the media would have had you believe that he was being held by Assad. And that, of course, is a lie, as you can see. If their story's right, he wasn't held by Assad. He was held by ISIS, the people that we fund and arm and train to fight against Assad. So we'll get into that in a second. So what we got to point out is the United States, NATO, the Western countries control ISIS. Now, this is something I've been through many times here on my show and in my articles, right? And we have I have a map in this article of much of the Middle East, and it's the ISIS activity lines and supply lines. And what you have is you see two big areas where they come in from Turkey, and then they seize the territory in Syria, and they march east and seize large swaths of territory in Iraq. All right, and then they can come back and forth over. It's a staging ground. Tony Cartolucci's got an article out. He's very good over at Land Destroyer, and he's got an article called "Implausible Deniability: West ISIS Terror Hordes in Iraq," and that's where this map comes from. So we had back in 2011, and even as early as 2007, the U.S. had been arming and funding and supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and a bunch of other armed terror groups and jihadis to overthrow the government of Syria, and also to fight Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that, the main fighting force in Lebanon. They also wanted to use this as a destabilization agent against Iran and any other government that's friendly toward Iran. We had billions of dollars of cash that was sent to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is the precursor of ISIL and ISIS and now IS, right? It is we sent money to Al-Nusra, which is an affiliate of Al-Qaeda and an affiliate of ISIS. Of course, they fight amongst themselves because they're apes, and they can't really connect long enough to have a legitimate, organized fighting force. Right? So they disagree on one silly point of their religion, and then they start killing one another and beheading one another. Well, if they only killed and beheaded one another, I would consider that a good day. But unfortunately, they attack innocent people. Now we had ISIS that was harbored on NATO territory, armed and funded by U.S. CIA agents, and they were given cash, they were given weapons brought from the Saudis, the Qataris, and other NATO members. And the so-called non-lethal aid that the U.S. and the British sent included some of the vehicles that we now see ISIS fighters driving in. As Tony Carlucci writes, he says, they didn't take this gear from moderates. There were never any moderates to begin with. That's right. That's right. We always have to remember this. Whenever they say moderate rebels, you know the Free Syrian Army engaged in beheadings? The ones that were supposed to be the moderates? So where the hell are the moderates? They keep looking to show me a Syrian moderate rebel, and I haven't found one yet, because they don't exist. Of course, there's Hirsch's report, Seymour Hirsch's report back in 2007 called The Redirection, where he talks about this. We also have, as far back as 2005, an article by Michael Hirsch and John Barry for Newsweek, and an article called The Salvador Option, where they talk about this as well. Again, ISIS is a product of NATO and the Gulf Cooperation Council as far back as 2007. The Saudis, of course, were involved, trying to ignite a region-wide sectarian war to basically weaken Iran and use that as a staging ground, eventually, to go into Russia. But we'll get into that in a second. These, and of course, Israel's involved. I got to mention that too. We went through that last week. Israel's involved. Remember, we had this invasion into Latakia that came across from Turkey. It was coordinated with NATO and Turkey, and Israel provided the air cover because it bombed parts of Syria where the death squads came over the border. Now, regardless, all this propaganda was used early on to blame Assad. Remember, I said initially we had articles that were saying that James Foley was abducted by the Syrian government, which is ridiculous. Why would the Syrian government want to abduct an American journalist, considering the propaganda attacks that were against the Syrian government to begin with, unreasonable PR attacks that were thrown at them. This is one of the laughable articles in the mainstream media. Michael B. Kelly, a Business Insider, right? And he also says that Assad had kidnapped Foley. Well, you would think that he'd have a lot of egg on his face, but given the fact that Americans collectively don't have an IQ over 40, generally speaking, he doesn't have to really change his propaganda. He doesn't have to apologize. He doesn't have to retract anything. What he says is that, no, Assad did have Foley, but he handed him over to ISIS. What? Why? This is ridiculous, right? No evidence, absolutely no evidence is provided. It goes against all logic. But this is what Kelly says, a Business Insider. You should lose your journalistic credentials to begin with immediately, Michael Kelly. No reason holding our breath for that. So there's, again, no reason that Assad would have had Foley to begin with, and there's certainly no reason he would have handed him over to ISIS. Assad wants to destroy ISIS. He's been destroying ISIS. He's killed more terrorists, legitimate terrorists, than the United States ever has, and probably ever will. He's certainly produced less of them. Now, propaganda purposes. In August 2014, American bombing of Syria. So what are we looking at here? What is the end game? Well, I say the end game for Syria, because what we're doing is seeing a propaganda attack against Syria, saying that ISIS is in Syria, ISIS is in Iraq. We've got to fight ISIS, but there's no point in fighting ISIS in Iraq if we don't fight them in Syria. Now, this is going to be the Vietnam argument, right? The Cambodia argument. We can't fight an army in Vietnam and then allow them to run across the border and get shelter, so we've got to cross the border with them and violate national sovereignty and all common sense. Go across the border with them. We can't handcuff the troops. Well, that's what we're hearing about Syria now. We can't fight ISIS in Iraq and fight and leave them alone in Syria and let them have a staging ground in Syria to fight in Iraq. Well, we know that the staging ground is the U.S. is funding it, and in Syria against Syria. Never forget that. But we've seen propaganda assaults in the mainstream media coming from people like Patrick Cockburn of the Independent in June of this year, where he wrote, Iraq crisis exclusive, U.S. rules out military action until Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki stands down. This is an older article, but it states that, you can't fight ISIS in Iraq and not fight them in Syria. Anne-Marie Slaughter, the former State Department Director of Policy Planning under the Obama administration, has just been foaming at the mouth. She should go on a date with John McCain. She wants to fight in Syria immediately. And now we've got the Obama administration to say they're weighing strikes in Syria. Again, they tried this once. I don't really want to say the American people stood up. It was they weren't interested. But now they've got other things to take their attention away from Syria. So we'll launch. It's likely that we'll launch cross-border strikes into Syria and back up death squads as we generally do. What is the end game here? It's Russia, right? Slaughter, Anne-Marie Slaughter, the appropriately named Anne-Marie Slaughter, is proof of this because she states in her article basically that if you want to hit Russia, you can't do it in Ukraine because Putin is too strong. You've got to hit Syria where he's weak. And she's got a whole article devoted to this. And this, of course, is Brzezinski's grand chessboard geopolitical game of micro-states and mini-states. So this is what's being promoted here in the mainstream media, and the U.S. government is planning to go into Syria with targeted airstrikes. Again, the article, NATO using Foley and ISIS as a pretext for bombing Syria. Ultimate target is Russia. Now, we've got to talk about the situation in Ferguson. I haven't talked about it much on my show. In fact, I don't think that we've talked about it at all. The situation has grown as of the last few weeks, and it's important before we make any commentary on this that we look at the history of it. The Michael Brown situation to begin with. Michael Brown, of course we know, he was shot and killed by Darrell Wilson, the cop. Lots of stuff has come out about this. The issues back and forth. Was Michael Brown guilty? Was he innocent? Did he go for the officer's gun? Or was he just approached by the officer and basically shot dead like so many other people? If Darrell Wilson approached Michael Brown and Michael Brown attacked him and went after his gun, well then Wilson has the right to defend himself. Given the track record of American police, the fact that they've killed 5,000 people in the last 10 years, and given the fact that they've killed more American citizens than insurgents in Iraq, I tend to not believe the story of the police. The Ferguson Police Department is notoriously corrupt, like a lot of police departments are. The original story was that this guy pulls up at Michael Brown, starts yelling at him, gets out of his car, and there's a struggle. Then he shoots Michael Brown several times and kills him. Well, the details are somewhat murky because there's very little evidence here about what happened. There's also the video of Michael Brown. Did he rob a store? As far as I know, the store owner said that wasn't Michael Brown. That's not the same guy. And I also believe that the timestamps were different, right? Yeah, the video timestamp and the arrest timestamp, the confrontation timestamp, and the actual bulletin of the makeup and the description of the person who was supposed to have robbed the convenience store are different, and it doesn't look like that Wilson could ever have expected him to be a suspect. In fact, the police chief said that Wilson didn't know that Michael Brown was a suspect, and I don't think it's even possible that he did, because I think, from what I understand, and again I qualify this by saying from what I understand at this point, and I'm not an expert on the details of this incident, that the confrontation occurred before the bulletin was put out. So, regardless, this is the situation. We got a guy who is dead and killed by a cop in Ferguson, and protest erupted. Anger and protest erupted, and there was looting. Now, let me be clear before I get into where I stand on the protest, but looting is a disgusting act. Looting is done by scum, and it's stupid, right? You're going to throw a fit, and you're going to burn down your own neighborhood and steal tennis shoes, and you're going to steal Nikes and cheap beer from the convenience store, and whatever else you can get your grubby little hands on. That's stupid, right? And for all the white liberals, it's a strange breed, white liberals, but for all of them that were justifying the looting, then please put your name and address down on the list, because the next time the rest of us get pissed off, we're going to take that aggression out on your white liberal homes, right? We're going to burn your home down. Because that makes about as much sense. But that's a different topic. All right. Now we've got the looters that they did take place. The looting took place, and that is animalistic behavior, and it can't be it can't be condoned. It can't be allowed. But the protesters have been peaceful, from what I can tell. I mean, there's obviously a protest. There's things that happen, but largely, mostly, overwhelmingly peaceful there. In fact, as the looting continued, we also saw business owners coming out with guns to protect their businesses, and lo and behold, white liberals, it worked. Funny thing about criminals, they don't like guns pointed at them. But we also had protesters. Michael, the protesting police brutality, they surrounded businesses, and they prevented looters as well. And in fact, a lot of the protests were saying the people who were looting here aren't even from here. They're not from Ferguson. So where do they come from? Well, we'll get into that because this is interesting. Now, as the protest gained steam, we had, what do we have happen? We have the Department of Justice sending in its experts, right? The experts go in and stir up racial division. This is exactly what happened with Trayvon Martin and all of that fiasco, right? The Department of Justice comes down there and immediately engages in creating a race issue. And of course, we get the other famous FBI agents of Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton and Jesse, always never more than 5 miles away from a situation where they can go in and steal what little bit of money is left from older black women and make a lot of money off of that. Al Sharpton, of course, is the famous FBI informant and snitch. Jesse Jackson is implicated in the complicity in the assassination of Martin Luther King. So, not much time to spend on these clowns, but the fact that they're there shows you what's happening. And immediately, this started getting turned into a race issue, not about the police. And of course, these clowns are involved in it. We have the new Black Panther Party, which should be noted that the new Black Panther Party has nothing to do with the old original Black Panther Party, which was more of a citizens' militia than anything else. The new Black Panther Party is an ultra-racist organization that is scum. Black version of the skinheads, I guess. So they're going to get out there, they're going to engage in violence and cause all kinds of problems, which is what they've tried to do. We've got one of the most open demonstrations of the police state and of the militarization of police in years. And here's what disgusting. It was turned into a race issue when you have, of course, there's counter-protesters now who are supporting the police. I guess you can wheel these low-grade morons out of anywhere. They're supporting the police. They're very small numbers of people, but they fit a specific demographic. We have the police who are the military doing exactly what those of us who've been talking about this for years have said they were going to do. Get out in their little military uniforms and their helmets and their machine guns and their MRAPs and their tear gas, and they're going to engage in battle against the American people because that's what they want to do. Now that is scum. All these police departments with MRAPs preparing for war against the American people, you're scum too. Once this turned into a race issue, it didn't take long, right, for sides to be taken in that regard. Well, I, for one, have much respect for these people who stood out there and said, in the face of big steroid-head goons and MRAPs and machine guns, pointing guns at reporters and say, "I will fucking kill you," they continued to protest. They didn't run away. Now, there's been reports that shots were fired at police. And here's what I'll say. Now, A, I don't know who fired the shots. Was it the new Black Panther Party? Was it the FBI trying to instigate violence to justify a crackdown, to get people killed? Or was it somebody who just had enough of every single day being harassed by the police, being slammed to the ground, being thrown in jail for minor infractions, all the while by living in poverty? This one guy gave one hell of a speech. But this one man responded, well, he can't go to the store at night because he lives in Ferguson, and it's martial law, and his grandmother in a wheelchair, and he can't take her to the hospital or to the doctor because he was out showing 3 forms of ID in America because the National Guard was on the streets, and the police, you couldn't tell the difference. They're like Blackwater. Maybe it was somebody like that who pulled the trigger. I don't know. So we got to be on guard for this, though, for the destabilization, because as soon as it happens, as soon as protests take place, that there will be people trying to infiltrate, turning it into a race issue, trying to divide the American people, and this is not a time where we should be divided. Michael Brown really isn't the issue. What the issue is, the human crap that you saw on the streets, riding around in MRAPs and firing tear gas at peaceful protesters and pointing weapons at journalists. That's all for us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.